you not?
Good beings. It's like Christmas morning.
This is Jaw Praise Whitewater, and I'm your host, Nick Turner.
A celebration of whitewater kayaking and the legends who shaped the sport. Jaw Praise Whitewater is supported by Kayak Session Magazine. You may think you get the full story looking through social media and seeing the clips, but there's just something about holding actual paper in your hand and seeing that the sport's really going off and the people out there are on amazing expeditions and doing amazing things. So pick up a copy of Kayak Session if you get a chance. Go website, sign up. Jaw Praise Whitewater is also proud to support American Whitewater. Now, if kayaking whitewater has a soul, then American Whitewater is right there at that soul, opening up runs, supporting the sport, there from day one. And really, I don't know of any sport that really has an organization that's so true to its core and such a proponent as American Whitewater. So sign up for that if you're not signed up yet. We now have some Rush Sturgis material at the end of every episode. So instead of just ending now, we're going to go into some Rush. Beautiful music. Look it up online. You got to really, in any streaming service, you need to type in RUSHSTURGES. Full thing, type it in, listen to some Rush.
All right. True pleasure to have with me today, Willie Kern. And, well, if you ever go driving around Vermont with another kayaker and every creek you drive over, you say, has someone run that creek? It's always, oh, I think the Kern Brothers ran that one. I think the Kern Brothers ran that one. And then Willie went on to be really central in this just really special era of High Sierras exploration that unlocked some of the world's greatest multi-days, really. These runs like the Middle Kings, Fantasy Falls, Royal Gorge. And then Willie was central to really one of the greatest river expeditions of all time. You know, an expedition that was not just kind of significant to kayaking, but kind of significant to humans in river exploration, and that was the Yarlung Tsangpo in Tibet, which kind of cliche to call it the Mount Everest of rivers, but it's kind of what it was. So Willie, though, I think his greatest contribution, maybe in my mind, though, was really kind of showing that there was this soulful path available in kayaking, kind of this non-corporate, I don't know, sort of philosophical warrior path available in there. So really great to have you, Willie. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into kayaking?
Well, I'll say first of all, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. And, I just admire everybody who's committed their life to anything. And, clearly you've walked this path as well. So it's fun to just get to chat with another like-minded individual. But yeah, we grew up, northern New England is pretty much the best way to describe it. We grew up all across Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And yeah, as you said, that's where it all started. It's pretty fun to think about the tidal bores on the coast of Maine. We were surfing like mini skooks back before, we knew anything about Skookumchuck or anything. That was really some of our earliest forays were on, tidal bores on the coast of Maine.
Wow.
That's pretty funny, huh? So, but yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Tsangpo. I'm just going to jump right on it because, we talk about like that has a lot of superlative associated with it. But when I think about Everest, I'm actually reading Ed Viester's book right now. And, the whole notion of like going to the summit and then coming back down. And if I look at like our objective relative to what we did, we made it to like Camp 3. But it was just fun to go there because it was that idea of going someplace where nobody's been. And I think, yourself and myself, and there's so many people that really locked into that, like the purity of the experience of like being in that place. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So did you guys kind of have some mentors in Vermont that drug you guys out to start?
I mean, it's funny because when we started boating in the early '80s, there weren't that many people to look up to. Because I remember I was telling my daughter about this idea that you drive around for months at a time without seeing a kayak, and if you saw a kayak on a rig, you pulled over to talk to that person because that you had all of a sudden made a connection that was one more than you already knew. And clearly that has changed a lot. But my mentors were the people that were hung on my walls. That was Rob Lesser. Like, I know you've spoken with him, and I will always look up to that guy. Just the accomplishments, the also that sense of like genuine kind of what's the right word? He's like a genuine explorer. He explores the rivers, he explores himself, he explores relationships with other people, and I think that that's so we all wanted to be like Rob. I had a picture of him, and when we finally had made enough money, picking stuff at the farm and working at pig farms, we went and bought the Protect helmet, the Extra Sport life vest, the Dancer, and the Harmony dihedral paddle, and we were Rob Lesser. Far cry from it. There were a couple people. We did camps when we were young. We got shoved off to camps. That was a big part of our growing up, and there were a couple people that were pretty instrumental in those camps. Ben Ellis actually still rocks around this community. He seemed like he could do things that we thought unimaginable at the time, and I would point to him specifically. He was kind of Mr. Smooth.
Nice. And so you guys kind of got on the creeks around Vermont, kind of the standard rivers, I imagine. Like, hey, let's go start exploring some of these things. And once it caught on, it was just a whole wealth of them to go check out.
Yeah, it's funny to think about what might have been done prior to that era, because we were on that wave right after kayaks had really transitioned in earnest into plastic boats. And so I think that for all of us, and I think I look at the pioneers in California, and what really shifted for a lot of people was that, the composition of the boat really kind of unlocked that next level of rock contact, which if you're boating creeks in Vermont, you're going to get some rock contact. And clearly that has, that's true beyond Vermont. That's everywhere now. We hit a lot of rocks sometimes.
Yeah, that did unlock, Holbeck said that kind of unlocked that era of his era once it went to plastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty exciting times. So.
Yeah, and you guys kind of wanted to go west. How'd that kind of happen?
Yeah, so, traveling and kayaking really became a big thing before Johnny or I even had our driver's license. Our dad passed away when we were pretty young, and my mom, I'll always say that she gave us the biggest gift, and that was the gift of freedom. She really let us kind of explore the world on our own terms. And so I remember it was, I'm not very good at chronology, so I'm just going to apologize up front for that. But Johnny and I think we were 14 when we did our first trip down south. Chuck was the only eligible driver. And this was like the test run. And so we went down and we paddled on the Nolichucky. We did some high water Chattooga. We did some really fun stuff for the time. This was probably 1985, 6, right in there. And we ran into some great southern paddlers. There was already a community burgeoning down there, and so that was exciting. That really, spawned this idea like, oh, there's more. Let's keep, you open the one door and another door kind of opens, and it just kept on working like that. And the following summer rather, we loaded up the Toyota van and headed across the country. we had it was multi-purposed. One, dead shows. We visited a couple dead shows along the way. We were pretty enthusiastic about their music. I like to think of that as our Burning Man, the Burning Man of our time a little bit. And so we headed west, and we made it to Yellowstone, and a place I know you have some deep, intimate relationships with. And we actually boated from Tower Junction. We hiked upstream. We boated down to the bridge, and we passed the bridge. We went past the bridge about a mile, and we hiked back up. We didn't know anything, but we just saw water that we had never seen before, and we figured it was an opportunity to go kayaking. Much to our chagrin, we found out once we got back to our car that was not a place that we should go kayaking. That was no longer on the table. But that was a really formative trip for us, because we boated on the main salmon. We were pretty much headed for the Laksa. The pipeline wave, the pictures of Rob surfing pipeline fueled, most of that journey. And we also didn't know very much. Yeah, pipeline fueled most of that journey, seeing those images. And so we drove and we drove, and we stopped in Sun Valley, and we worked for more money to be able to make it further. And sure enough, we showed up to the Laksa like August 4th, and there was no water in that river. So it was a pretty good lesson in the hydro cycle of the West versus the hydro cycle of the East. So, learn a lot real quick, don't you?
Yeah. Was it kind of after that first southern trip where it felt like, I'm a kayaker. This is what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we already considered ourselves that, but then once we were on the road, then we were living this like dream that was provided to all of us by William Neely. The car with all the boats on top, and the stuff hanging out of it, and the irreverent lifestyle. And I think we all locked into that pretty quickly, because it was like a whole different way to live than anything we had ever really been exposed to. And so our early exposure, our mom was a canoe guide up in Algonquin Provincial Park up in Canada, up in Ontario, Northern Ontario. And so we grew up in canoes, and canoes were great, and they were a great way to travel as families. But it wasn't until we were on the Allagash River that we saw kayaks, and all three of us immediately, this light bulb went on. Like, there's something different that's available there. And yeah, sure is, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's cool. The William Neely. It was kind of like the you mentioned the dead shows. It was like the dead artwork, right? Of it, like symbolized this thing you could capture, this whole lifestyle, and that it was okay, right? And that it was like something to aspire to. That was cool.
It really was. And it's funny because I've kind of come full circle now, where I'm recollecting those books to have just for my own self, but also to share with my daughter and to share with, other younger kayakers. Because, there's that lifestyle piece but then there's also the piece that I don't think, I don't know if anybody's done a better job of conveying in a two-dimensional platform the structures of rivers. I have that image in my head of like the wave that goes into the wave and then breaks apart into all the waves. There's just so many images from those books that, we have the internet now. We did not have the internet then. We had, the cult, the books, and the occasional kayaker to try to like glean information from. And it was a pretty fun time. I mean, I imagine for you as well, right? Like, it's a pretty exciting time to be figuring it out and not and this isn't a judgment, but having things sort of handed to you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, what a gift he was to Whitewater. I had those drawings of it really helped you visualize how that recirc was. I'm pretty sure the first time I got body recirced in a hole, I was like William Neely drawing in my mind. Okay,
There
this is
it
what's
is.
happening.
There it is. Full circle on William Neely was that the first year of the North Fork Festival on the North Fork of the Feather Fest rather. We had a upside down boat race, so you'd flip over your boat and you'd race on the bottom of it. That was kind of in that spirit. A lot of the American Whitewater crew was out there, and I won. It's one of my proud accomplishments, winning the upside down boat race. But I won a William Neely original, and so if I were at home, I would love to show it to you. Behind my desk, I have a William Neely original drawing with the edits on there, and it's the classic one. It's the fella who's getting into his squirt boat, and his feet are talking, and they're like, "Ow, ooh, ee."
Oh, that's epic.
So I think that's probably one of my most prized possessions.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then, and then like you said, for those influences, it then once the early '90s hit into the mid '90s, I started to get the movies, that started rapidly evolving. Were you guys always kind of filming yourselves when you were cruising around, or is it kind of just bumping into filmmakers like Lindgren later?
Yeah, so it was all. The 90s are clearly a very instrumental time for both of us and our journeys, and then so many people and a lot of the folks you've talked to. Um, it was a pretty frenzied time, I think. And for us, the earliest influence of the 90s was we were going back down south, and Chuck had gone down south, and he'd gone to the Green River in 1989 or 90. And he said he came home and he was like, guys, I have a place for us to go now, another place that we have to add to the list. And this is a place that we can continue to go, right? Because the dam, RIP the dam, sadly, courtesy of what happened most recently. But so we went down the following year, and we got to meet Woody and Wayne Gentry and like all the whole Go Forth gang, all these people that were really pushing the envelope in that era, not only in their surface boats, but in their squirt boats, right? And that's like the cult within the cult, I think about, because squirt boating really became such an important part for us about how we interact with rivers. But before we kind of got there, we got to the Green River at a time when, I think that's also part of the story of kind of unlocking the potential. And I will never, I don't want to ever discount what was going on in Europe at that time, because I think, Europe was going through this independent evolution because they've been running hard whitewater, more prolifically, maybe longer than we have. But there are those inflection points where there's like a burst of light, and then all of a sudden a bunch of things change. And the Green River was pretty instrumental, certainly on the East Coast, and I think that trickled out west as people headed out west with that information that you could run this rapid called Gorilla, and you could actually land on the rocks. And there was water that would be pushing you away. There was like that interface with water and rock that creates these pillows or creates transitions that we can kind of capitalize on. And I would, I'm going to make a big leap, and that's a big part of what happened in California. I mean, I think about all the rapids in California where you're reconnecting, and that's Gorilla in a nutshell.
Well, Chuck's drop is like a gorilla on steroids.
Yeah, right. Yep, there's a couple of them out there. They're so good, but it's hard to run those ones anymore. Really, the body changes, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. But it's so cool you guys had just that built-in crew of the three of you really just pushing each other and helping each other along. And that like I think of my journey, none of it would have happened without the crew, that we all just supported each other and pushed each other and then passed opportunities to each other, right? It was just really a collective. So you guys, that's so cool. You had just as tight a collective as you can get.
Yeah, it was, and clearly, the brother relationship, and there's something really special about doing things with your brothers. And I think for Johnny, Chuck, and I, we were kind of a match set where, our abilities were similar, our enthusiasm was similar, our, passions were very similar. And, if you don't have somebody to go kayaking with, one person doesn't want to go, you normally have somebody else to go with. So it was pretty easy to keep on, building that, building upon that. And it's funny looking back at this point. I think about Chuck a lot at this point in my life. And I'm just really grateful because Chuck afforded both of us a motivation that was so deep and so intrinsic that it was contagious. And whether if it was left to Johnny and my devices, we would have, run with it quite as far as we did. That's a question for another lifetime, but certainly grateful. And yes, to your point, like the cruise, and I think of a lot of those people like brothers, like certainly, early on, Woody was a mentor to us, but he was like kind of like an uncle, like the dunkle. We all referred to him as the dunkle. He was the dad uncle. Like we didn't have a dad, so all these older kayakers became our dunkles, and they were like, they were teaching us life lessons while also sharing these really formative experiences. And it's all about the people. I mean, and I think that, when you think about what's the most important part of this whole experience, and certainly for myself, we didn't have cameras early on. Cameras were a function more of Scott and, what happened at that point, in the mid 90s. Um, but even to this point, it's about the people. It's about the relationships that we can form in these places. And that's like the purest part of this because I've always appreciated like we're together, but we're totally alone, and that's like an interesting relationship to put yourself in with people. Would you not? I mean, I don't know. That's a part that's always resonated with me. Like,
Yeah, well, so much of it's about the people, right? Everything you do, right? I mean, sometimes you get these dream setups of doing exactly what you wanted to do, where you want to do it, you got it nailed, but then you're alone doing it, right? And it's like, oh, really? It is all about these people that you share it with, and yeah, having the older brother, we both lost our older brother who was the same year in hard whitewater, right? And it's they are the influence, right? They inspired you on to that. I mean, like both of us, it was like that's why we're on this journey. It's because they're like this is what it's about, is going out and fun hogging nature. So like, all right, that's the program we're on. Right? But now, interesting you say that you think about them a lot because, like, I feel like I miss them more now than any time. Like I'll be out, I surf alone a lot. I do a lot alone a lot. Backcountry skiing, surfing, all of it, and I'll just be out there surfing and just like he should be here. Like it'll be just me at some of these breaks. Not another soul out. I'm just like, fuck. It's like these are the times like when we're really hang out, right? It's like when you're busy in life, you don't think about it as much. You're going through young family and things, and then get older, it's like fuck, they missed a lot.
yeah, and you bring up an interesting point because I think dad life is a little bit of it, but it's like I also do a lot of things by myself, and that doesn't necessarily bother me, but it's it's tricky because it's that dichotomy of like I miss him and I wish he was here, but I also like fundamentally feel like he's there. I think about like how we carry people forward in our lives. And for us, Chuck became the heron, and that was a big part of that day on the Black Canyon. And herons are everywhere, and herons always seem to show up at just the right moment for me, especially on the river, because that's kind of where they live. That's their domain. But yeah, it's fun to. This is kind of like this is the retrospective period of our life, and I'm not saying that in a depressing way, but I think this is the part where we're like, you get to slow down and take a better inventory of how you got here and what was important and what is still important. And yeah, that was a tricky year, I think, for us and for, there were several others that year. That was a sad time, and it's a time that clearly refocused. I mean, for me, it really refocused for me. And I know for you, you took direct steps based on that year that really like changed the trajectory. For me, it changed the trajectory of the lens through which I saw things, and I know for you, you took, direct steps. I think WRSI, am I saying that right? Right? Like that was a direct step, right?
Yeah, it was really that summer when the kind of kayaking world woke up to how dangerous it was, sort of, right? Like you were saying, it had been this big surge of momentum and people pushing it harder and harder, and then all of a sudden it was just a really sobering summer.
hmm Very sobering summer. Something that you might appreciate hearing too is so we went over to Europe the following summer, and just spent the whole summer over there, and we boated a lot. But we also got immersed into the history of kayaking in Europe. And when we showed up, Marcus Schmidt, who, famous kayaker, expedition style kayaker, he picked us up at the Frankfurt airport. And the first thing he said to us is, I'm sorry for your loss. Now, what are you going to do about it? And that was the whole trip was about like the fact that they had gone through that 15 years prior. They had like an incredible year of mortality in their boating community. And they're like, we've done this. So now it's your opportunity. Like when it happened in Europe, the throw bag was developed. We saw this library of boats at Eskimo, breakaway cockpits. Like they had a machine to, they built this structure to test the departing angle for a boat when it fell in the water to try to figure out the best angle to get away from things. Admittedly, they came up with the topo that maybe wasn't the best. There was some room for improvement. But it's just interesting because I think that that what comes around kind of goes around with regards to that. Sadly,
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if you guys just kept kayaking, and I took a whole year off. I went over to Nepal, walked from Beni to Simikot and back, and skied from Jackson to Cook City, across Yellowstone with my dad. And that was, and then finally going back with all the boys on the Grays River there in Jackson, and that was like where we grew up kayaking, camping on the Grays in high school, and yeah, I just remember being back on that river with them, and I was like, all right, it's okay to come back.
it's okay to come back. That's so interesting. And so, I mean, I spent a lot of time in Cook City over the years now, and I'm that's a marvelous objective to just walk across Yellowstone. What a cool experience, and Nepal for that matter. So kudos to you. I think Johnny and I, you know, I've always thought that if we had to take out right where Chuck died, I might have stopped kayaking, but because we had to keep kayaking, I think I went through that process on the river to be like, why are we here? What happened? You know, and to realize like we're here because this is what we always did. And it took some time for sure. I know that, you know, that was the year of the Worlds up on the Ottawa, which was you know, that was a mainstay for us when we were going up to the Ottawa, and you know, squirt boats, surface boats, whatever it was. The Ottawa was a great place to just go get yourself thrashed. But that year we went up for the Worlds, and I remember sitting on the wave at the top of McCoy's above Phil's Hole. It's a green wave. And Johnny and I were just taking turns on that green wave, and people would come down and be like, they'd like gesture, like, get off the wave. And I remember both of us were just like, I'm not getting off this wave. Like, there is something happening on this wave that I am not willing to surrender. Like, there are a bunch of waves downstream from here. Please go to those waves. I'm sure I can say it as nicely as that. You know, it's like the water coming around the corner of the boat and just like breaking around and just like that sensation and the sun setting. And I think it all came back in those moments. And certainly, you know, it took some time to get back into more challenging whitewater.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, Chuck was so welcoming. You know, I remember bumping into him up on the Blackfoot, and he was just right away. Hey, try this kayak out. Here, get in this. You know, just such an ambassador and welcoming guy.
Yeah, enthusiastic. He really drank from that like fountain of excitement, the fountain of enthusiasm, I think, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So when you got out to Cali, so did you just guys bump into Lindgren out kayaking and start hooking up?
That's kind of a funny story. So California, that was a whole decade of my life, you know, and it was funny the way we showed up there because Chuck and I made it out there first, and we had been talking to Woody, right? One of our dunkles, one of the folks that we really admired, and he had been out there boating, and he was like, Golden Gate. Golden Gate is the best river in the world. Like, you have to go to Golden Gate. And so we went out there and we drove straight to the put in for Golden Gate. And it was, you know, this was before dream flows. This was, you know, like I think those of us who've been around for a minute all appreciate what it meant to actually try to tap into a flow without looking at like a very specific number. And so we got there, we had a shuttle driver and the guidebook says very dangerous above 2500 CFS. It's the only one in that whole book that says that. Everything else just says like, here's the flow. This says it used. I don't know if it still does, but that version of that book said very dangerous above 2500. And we were both sitting there, and it was like the worst thing to do to a set of kayakers is to be sitting there with a shuttle driver looking at a river and be like, is that 2500 CFS? I don't think that's 2500 CFS. Is that I don't know. I don't think that's 2500. So we put on because we knew that that's where we needed to go. And very quickly we realized like this is much more than 2500 CFS. And so the first thing we did in California was get our asses handed to us. Like, but we ran everything. We had a, you know, pretty huge day for anybody, for us specifically. And I know folks still don't go in there above 2500 CFS, and I wouldn't recommend anybody go in there above 2500 CFS. And so we got picked up at the end, and we were driving back through Coloma, right? Coloma's a bit of a hub for that American River, Yuba River area. And I distinctly remember there's a corner as you're coming into town, and you come around, and I remember seeing all these kayaks. And they seemed like they had stuff spread out. There were all these kayaks. And we were not unfortunately, we were going to meet up with a buddy, Rock Schreiber, who, you know, still kayaking. That guy still gives her. he was also instrumental when we were younger up in New York State. Chuck went to school up in upstate New York, and that's where he met Rock. And so we boated with him a lot back on the East Coast. There's a whole crew from New York State that we got to know that were also, again, there's so many people just like along the way that I think you like grow because of. Um, and so we were going to meet up with Rock, and so we kind of drove by this, and I was like, what was happening there? And we went on and we did all a bunch of stuff that year. We didn't meet Scott until we were up at the Clackamas. It took going to Oregon to meet Scott. And the way we met was, and this was Scott and Mark. The Knapp brothers weren't quite in the picture yet, but we met at Bob's Hole Rodeo. And we had heard about from Jed Weingarten, who was a new friend. We had heard about the Little White. You know, people had just started running the Little White. And so we went out to the Little White. I think that, if I remember correctly, we were like the eighth party to go down that river. And, some of the early descenders of Spirit Falls. It was like, what do you do? And we had that whole deliberation at the lip there, like, do you plug or do you boof? And clearly you don't do either one of those. You do the exact thing in between those. But like coming from the East Coast mindset, we were like, send it, like don't send it so hard you're going to land flat, but get that bow out there. And I remember, Charlie Muncie was also there. And he and Mark Hayden, this is where Driftwood was born. The production company Driftwood was like the discussion, like, do you boof or are you Driftwood? And I think it was Charlie who did it first. He was in the eddy right at the lip. It wasn't high water by any means. It was probably low threes. And he just like peeled out of the eddy, zero speed, tucked, ran it that way. That's how he ran it. So that's another point where we're like, oh shit, people are doing it differently out here. Like this is something that we've never really given into because on the East Coast, that's like, that's not something you do. And that's not something we had done until, up until that point. We were really good at boofing. We weren't great at plugging. So
And that's where the name Driftwood was born.
name was born right there. That's where it came from. Like just be a piece of driftwood. And we know that you don't always want to be a piece of driftwood, otherwise you end up with all the other driftwood. But like there's some places where being a piece of driftwood isn't a bad idea.
Yeah. That was probably that 93 Bob's Hole Rodeo, that one that had that was really a significant event, right? I mean, I remember we would sit there on the couch and watch that all the time. We had some VHS copy of it, and yeah, I had them all in there.
Yeah, right around there. That was definitely the era. And then I remember at 95, that was the first year I saw people spinning on waves, right? A Barrett spun in a hurricane on the wave at Bob's Hole there, and then it was all about the whippet and the whiplash, and yeah, pretty fun. Bob's Hole I have a lot of memories from Bob's Hole.
Yeah. And Bernd and Arndt, did you paddle with those guys when they came over from Germany?
Yeah, I paddle with those guys a lot. We so b- I'm trying to think about exactly when that began. That was probably right around that time, just meeting those guys at rodeos. I remember they were referred to as the Bavarian tumbling team. Uh, you're either Barrett or you aren't. And you know, Barrett was dating Courtney Ludden, and so that Montana connection a little bit, and we all knew Brennan and Dan, and there was kind of that whole circle. It was fun because it was such a small community at that time. Like everybody knew everybody, I feel like. But I went on to paddle pretty prolifically with Arndt. I spent, you know, like a whole summer with him in Danny's RV. I spent a whole summer with him in Europe. He's also one of the big brothers for sure. That guy. Always really admired Barrett's paddling style. Talk about somebody who has like that steeze, that like smoothness, Barrett, and that power. Barrett was always that person. I spent the winter of 2004 in Europe too, so I got to play around in the winter with Barrett and Ollie and Ingrid and Olaf and Jens and the whole crew. So yeah, nice European connections.
So you went out and skied with all this crew?
Oh yeah, yeah. Barrett and I, or sorry, Arndt and I, we myself and an ex-girlfriend had a travel trailer that we would travel around in, and we brought it up to Whistler one year and parked it in somebody's driveway. We were going up there to kite ski, and it was really dangerous conditions in the backcountry, so we just were touring onto the hill, and so I lent Arndt my tele gear, and we skied together in Whistler for I don't know, probably a month and a half, 2 months that year. But yeah, it was fun. It's always fun to sort of cross-pollinate with people too, because I think, as we know, we've skied together, and there's so many folks that are in our community that we get to know that way as well. And Scott certainly. So after that, after running the Lil White, we knew we were moving to California to ski bum. We were skiers coming out of the Northeast, and that was kind of where we were headed, in no small part because there's this whole season in California in the winter that doesn't really get talked about very much. But as soon as it's snowing, it means it's either snowing and raining down low or sunny, and that means there's snow melting off the top. And so there's this great season to kayak. So you could ski any day you wanted to, and you could kayak in the same day. But we moved to California very quickly, and spent almost a decade ski bumming out of California. And we skied with Scotty and Dustin over at Sugar Bowl, and we worked over at Palisades at Tahoe. I'll never call it that. I'm so sorry. I'll always know it as Squaw, but I did that. Um, yeah, Squaw was a pretty inspiring place to be too, because that's probably where this filming component really was born out of. We were in kind of Squallywood, like, and Scott was already a little bit motivated by it, but I think that there was just so much in California at the time, ski films and just people filming things, and that was where it really started.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having that influence of coming out of Tahoe of the ski film stuff to be like, hey, I could do this on the kayaking side. That kind of influenced all of it, right? That influenced Gavir, seeing the snowboard and the dirt bike movies, certainly influenced us on the ski movies.
Yeah, big time, big time.
And so then you guys just kind of said, what can we go explore out here in the Sierras and build off of what Lars and those guys have done?
Yeah, I mean, I should look at a newer guidebook, and I don't know the latest version, but at the time, there were all these and the classic runs in California still hold up. Like, for any kayaker who aspires to be like, an expedition kayaker, go do the South Merced, go do Bald Rock, go do Devil's Canyon, go do the Kings Canyon. There's all these rivers that still are just incredible timepieces.
I send a lot of people to the South Merced. I said, if you want to go get a taste of High Sierra classic, South Merced is amazing.
It's amazing. It's such an amazing river. And so, there was like that classic class five, South Yuba as well, which was kind of it was a staple, a mainstay for the Tahoe crowd. We did that thing, I don't know how many times, and I know it's still just a mainstay for everybody who lives in that region. Um, but then you start looking at the guidebook, and you're doing the South Yuba, and you're doing, all these runs, and that's kind of like it just builds you up to that next thing. And the next thing for us was like, stuff that hadn't been run that we were seeing. Think Love's Falls on the North Fork of the Yuba. Um, and then, we actually saw Silver Fork of the South Fork of the American from a plane. We flew out to California one year, and our buddies lived in 185, which is a whole nother epic tale. But we went out there and we saw Silver Fork, and we're like, boom, let's go do that. And then we started doing Silver Fork and Golden Gate in a day. That's a good day. If you want a good day, that's a good day. Um, but then you'll start looking at the ones you referred to earlier. The Middle Kings and Fantasy Falls and Devil's Postpile and the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne. All these rivers that they would just list them like 50 portages question mark. And we quickly started realizing like we were actually running a lot of these portages, because they had portages listed. So you'd go do, the like some runs above Yuba Gap. Yuba Gap used to not run at all. That was not even a thing. There was no water in it ever. But we'd go run, Fordyce or the Upper South Yuba, and it was like this many portages. And then we'd get done with it. We'd be like, I don't know if there were that many portages, again, given current boat designs. And so we'd look for these rivers, and admittedly, it was a very testosterone-fueled environment where it was like, let's go do it. Like, let's go knock off some portages. And I will always appreciate, with some of those runs and the way that guidebook operates, they don't tell you everything. And the best kind of testament to that is I can't remember what river it is. I think it's the Devil's Postpile. Maybe it's not. It says like shuttle, like the shuttle description. And the way it's written up is if you can't find the put in, you're never going to get down the river. And I think that that's a really glorious tip of the hat to like take it, run with it, go with it. If you are in a place where you're doing the legwork to try to figure out what your next endeavor is and you have the wherewithal, like this could be yours too. you know and that's where I always want to remind people, because growing up for us it was always about the people that came before us. Like I always think about the fact that whatever I'm doing, I always have to be reminded that somebody did something way more badass with less way before I ever tried to do it. And so Walt Blackadar, Rob Lesser, John Wasson, the list is long and illustrious. McDougall, McDonough, like, and I think that, that was like their gift to that next generation was like, you can have this too, but we're not going to just give it to you. You have to kind of like cut your teeth a little bit on this. I mean, I think, one of the funnier stories from that time period was with the Devil's Postpile, which is a magnificent place. If I think about the runs in California, the Middle Kings, Grand Canyon Tuolumne, those all start from the crest and go west. But the Devil's Postpile starts on the east and cuts through the batholith, right? So it goes through the bottomlands. It goes all the way into that big batholith of granite. And, again, so what was it called? It was called K-Flow. So there was a phone number you could call. Did you ever call K-Flow? Was that a thing that you remember?
Yeah, I remember that.
K-Flow was pretty funny. You'd call and you'd get some flows. They weren't necessarily recent. They were like pretty arbitrary. They weren't always the same. And so what we started doing was calling places. And I remember there was a whole, summer of calling, like ranger stations down by Mammoth Pool, down at the takeout for the Devil's Postpile, and being like, hey, I'm just trying to get a sense of the flow. I'm a fisherman, and there's a section of the river I cross, and I don't want it to be too high so that I could, and it was like all of these like kind of weird methods to try to like elicit some kind of flow out of somebody. Because certainly with Devil's Postpile, 50 CFS makes a big difference in the crucible.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty funny.
It was exploration days, huh? Like for the Middle Kings, had you kind of looked, what kind of info did you have on that before hiking over
The pass.
So the only info we had on the Middle Kings, aside from, two-dimensional maps, was we also had the benefit of like Tamara Robbins. We had an inroad to Royal. She was wonderful, and she invited us to dinner, and we went to dinner with Royal Robbins, and we kind of picked his brain. Admittedly, it had been, a decade and a half or 2 decades since he had been 2 decades since he had been there, maybe more. So like the information was nicely seasoned, so it wasn't like I'm going to tell you that at this point this, at this point this, at this point this. It was more just like the feeling of the river a little more. And So yeah, we had talked to Royal Robbins, most specifically about the Middle Kings, and then we just went up there, and it was even funny trying to figure out like there's a scene in what is that in? It's in like Liquid Lifestyles or something. Good the last. It's not in Good the Last Drop, but like maybe it is. You know, negotiating with the folks that have the donkeys to try to
Mm.
get our boats up to the top, thinking that was like pretty clever of us. It was kind of clever. Like they took our gear and we carried our boats. I took my bulkhead out of my boat. I took everything out of my boat and gave it to the donkey on that one. But they dropped us off at the pass. It wasn't like a free ride. But just figuring it out, and then I think about, John Grace and Hillicky and all those guys going back and, doing kind of that like the Triple Crown in California, and what a great place to be at having just a little more information, and we're all just hitchhikers on, the information that came before us a little bit.
That must have been when even walking down to it, it's just like, oh my God, we just found the next classic.
Such a dream, such a dream, and certainly you get to the river there and you're like, oh, it's pretty small, like, but by that time we had done enough of these rivers to know like we just need one tributary for it to become something. And I think back then I also thought a lot more about like the gradient per mile, like, you know, this section's 510 feet per mile. Like, okay, are we going to break this down? Are we going to do this? I think this was a little vestigial from the East Coast, where you really get more intimate with the gradient, with the like specific mileage gradient. But I remember going through that river and being like, okay, we're in a 360-foot mile. This is what this feels like. We still have a 500-foot mile to go, you know. And Tehipite, like for anybody that makes it to Tehipite Valley, you've made it through the upper part, you still have the shit below you, the bottom nine. Tippity Valley is one of the most special places, and I think if anywhere this conversation goes, we're going to end up talking about the places that we get to, right? I mean, the places that you and myself and all of us who've been gifted this, like, the an entry point into sitting on our ass in a kayak. Like, we get to these places, and Tehipite was the one where it was like, oh damn, like we are in Yosemite without anybody. We are in this place with anybody. And I think that that was also something that I always will look back fondly upon the 90s in California. Like, generally, if you were somewhere like the Middle Kings or Tippity Valley, you were probably the only group in there. It wasn't until the 2000s that there were multiple groups doing things, you know.
Oh yeah.
So
No, you're in the most magical places, and there's no other way to get there. And especially those California multi-days, those campsites are just like, it's like, how is this real, that I'm here?
exactly, exactly. We used to refer to California as like, what Alaska is to big mountain skiing, California was to like multi-day big whitewater, big mountain whitewater, to be able to like do this stuff and then get out of your boat and like put your stuff out and it dries in like 5 minutes and you're hanging out in a pair of board shorts and a shirt and like, is this even real? I don't know.
So is.
Yeah, and then it was Postpile. Was that one later on?
Pretty shortly thereafter. I mean, Postpile. I think I wasn't on the first crew that went back in and did that. I was on the second crew. Postpile's hard work. Postpile is no joke. I would say that for anybody who's looking at whitewater, and it's funny because it hasn't been run for several years. I know, and Galen just went back in there this year, and I'm sure some other people followed suit. The Devil's Postpile is kind of like you're just constantly.
And right there, as we were about to hear some Devil's Postpile tales, we ran into some technical difficulties, and then Willie went on a sailboat for a bit. So we're going to call this a part 1 and have a part 2. And dang, that part 1 was chock full. So we actually thought we lost this recording for a couple weeks, and it was sad, but it was also just thankful that the conversation happened, even if no one heard it. And yeah, so here comes some Rush.
Grew up with a passion for the wild places, appreciation for nature and wide open spaces. He found a tribe of like-minded souls, wild folk who traded in conformity to go and chase the flow. It was the thrill of the unknown that made him feel alive, a visceral connection when he put his life out on the line, the type of feeling that you can't describe. And it grew from a hobby to a passion to a state of mind. But he was playing with fire, and he kept on chasing the high. Like a river on the rise, he was steady on the climb, but the bite of the wild, it would steal him of life. Like all days must fade into night, now he's free where the birds of prey take their flight. Man, it's always the good ones who have to die, and it feels like a game till we say goodbye. And now we sing,
take him river, oh take him on another whitewater ride. Take him river, oh take him home.
She was drawn to the river and the song it would sing. A young woman with ambition who grew up to be queen. She was bright-eyed and driven, living on the fringes. No plan through no man's land, she kept drifting. It was the rhythm of the wilderness that spoke to her, like boulders that rolled downstream, the flow sculpted her. Woken in focus, her devotion took her far beyond the limits that restrict us from the depths of who we are. But one day it all fell down, like the rain from a cumulus cloud. We all wash away one day to be renewed, but the loss hurt us all when it cost us you. Like temples to ruins now left for dust. She left us too soon from the flesh and blood, but her spirit burns on like the satin sun. We'll see you when we get there, Lulu, but we send you love. And now we sing,
take her river, oh take her on another whitewater ride.